Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was: my friend is in ICU ventilated with leukemia. The doctors have made her DNR or do not resuscitate. I disagree. What are the best options? You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from our readers, and in this week, Judy from Vancouver in Canada asks: my husband is quadriplegic and has been off the ventilator in intensive care for more than 2 weeks. The intensive care team wants to send him home with a tracheostomy, but I don't believe he'll need the tracheostomy. Help. Judy writes: hi Patrick, my husband is a quadriplegic and had a serious pneumonia. He was ventilated for 2 weeks, had a tracheostomy done for pulmonary toileting for very thick secretions. It's now been 2 weeks since the tracheostomy and my husband's lungs are clearing nicely. There are very little secretions left and his oxygen saturations are ranging around 97%. He has a Passy-Moore speaking valve and he's taking foods well. The intensive care team wants to send him home, leaving the tracheostomy in. He was perfectly fine before the pneumonia. Is it necessary for a permanent tracheostomy? Also, my husband's injury was a C6/C7 incomplete injury and was 11 years ago. He has been off the ventilator for over 2 weeks now, is speaking fine with a Passy-Moore speaking valve and has only been suctioned twice in 24 hours. His last chest x-ray was clear. Yesterday, the respiratory therapist said there was good air entry throughout the lungs and his chest sounded clear. The reasoning I have been given for a permanent tracheostomy is that if he gets pneumonia again, I will have clear access to suctioning. I am a retired registered nurse, director of nursing, so I have insight into this. I have asked to have my husband seen by a respiratory physician for further explanation. Thank you so much, Judy. Hi Judy, thank you for making contact. I'm very sorry to hear that your husband was perfectly fine without the tracheostomy prior to his hospital admission for pneumonia. From what you are describing, especially if he's taking foods well, my first guess would be that the tracheostomy doesn't have to stay. However, 2 weeks with a tracheostomy and without trying to take it out is by far too early to suggest the tracheostomy has to stay in. But this is just my first guess without actually knowing for sure. If your husband was fine without a tracheostomy before the pneumonia, there shouldn't be any reason why he should need it now. Questions are: is your husband still requiring ventilation support? And you denied that. And you also said he doesn't need suctioning very often. So from what you are describing, there should really be no reason why the intensive care team shouldn't be able to take out the tracheostomy tube. The reasoning that if your husband will get pneumonia again is just not a strong and convincing reason to live with a tracheostomy permanently. Of course, you should be taking the intensive care team's opinion into consideration. However, a what-if scenario should not be the reason for somebody to permanently live with a tracheostomy. It also means that if your husband is requiring suction twice daily and if he is able to cough, then they should at least try and take it out. Why don't they try anyway while he's still in hospital? You should also look into the guidelines for tracheostomy removal here. As a rule of thumb, the current guidelines for tracheostomy removal should be considered before removing the tracheostomy or decannulate your loved one. Your husband should be off the ventilator for at least 3 to 4 days, which it sounds like he has been. He should also be able to cough and swallow and therefore be not at risk of any aspiration. Aspiration is the entry of stomach content or sputum into the lungs after swallowing or vomiting. Also, consider the frequency of suctioning. Therefore, suctioning should be at a minimum and less than once or twice a day. Your husband should also be able to clear and maintain his own airway, and he should therefore be able to cough up his secretions. Generally speaking, the tracheostomy protects from aspiration because of the blocking of the trachea or windpipe with a cough. Also, a normal and satisfactory arterial blood gas test, which checks the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood. Also, oxygen saturations in the blood need to be above 93 to 94%, and that's the case with your husband from what you've written. Also, a normal and clear chest X-ray that doesn't suggest anything malicious like an infection, collapse, pneumonia or pneumothorax. Also, a swallowing test that is normal, because again, after tracheostomy removal, you want to make sure that there is no aspiration and that your father can actually enjoy some food and drinks. A swallowing test should be carried out by the speech pathology team. But you mentioned, Judy, that your husband is eating already. You can also check out the answer to a similar question from a reader here. My father has been weaned off the ventilator in intensive care and still has the tracheostomy in. When can the tracheostomy removed? I inserted a link in the written version of this blog below the video to this question. Also, Judy, after your husband fulfills all of those requests, his tracheostomy may be plugged or closed for 24 hours and then being monitored for breathing or respiratory difficulties or suction requirements before the tube can be removed. In any case, you should be fighting for what you believe is the right thing to do. I believe it's very poor from the intensive care team to not try harder and improve your and your husband's quality of life. A tracheostomy is a big impairment and he should have it removed if possible. It sounds to me like you have insight anyway. However, you should not be giving in to the intensive care team's demands and plans. Please let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. How can you have peace of mind, control, power and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You will get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care, and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.